if you want to do it really properly, you are going to look at an individual's power duration curve and prescribe the higher intensity training from their power duration curve.
That Triathlon Show, episode 93. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host, Michael, and on today's episode I interview, dare I say, the number one independent expert on coaching using running power meters, Steve Palladino. In episode 59, back a few months ago, we covered the basics of running with power in an interview with Chris Haig, and also some more advanced concepts, but today we'll go even deeper and focus more exclusively on those advanced use cases and how to use running with power, especially in training and racing analysis, and what kind of analysis you can do when you use running power meters. So things we'll cover include running effectiveness and how to improve it, training load quantification using running with power, and how to use the leg spring stiffness metric that you get in the Stride power center if you use a Stride power meter. And we will once again talk about the different power training zones and why Steve's zone system, in my opinion, is probably the best one, and what you may be using if you're already running with power and using something like Stride's zones or the Training Peaks zones is not necessarily ideal. So, a quick intro to Steve Palladino. He is a running coach at the Palladino Power Project, and he specializes in running with power. He's a former elite runner with a 2:16 marathon PR, and he was a qualifier for the 1980 Olympic trials in the US, that is. And he coaches runners from high schoolers to post-collegiate and elite runners and age groupers, and is a fellow Stride Power Coaching Group member. And he is the one who publishes, in my opinion, the most informative, relevant, and best information on running with power that I know of. And you can follow that on his Facebook group, which is the Palladino Power Project. And there's also a Google Doc menu of sorts that you can see all his previously published article. And we'll link to that in the show notes. Before we hear the interview, though, this episode is sponsored by Precision Hydration. They have sweat tested thousands of athletes, and the average athlete loses about 950 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat, and that is around about twice what most traditional electrolyte supplements contain. So if you want to make sure that you are not one of those heavy sodium sweaters that lose much more sodium that you are actually replacing, find out a ballpark number quickly, easily, and for free on precisionhydration.com and take their free online sweat test. And if you end up buying any other products, use the discount code THATTRIATHLONSHOW, all one word, for 15% off. This episode is also sponsored by Triathlon Corner. They have a great selection of products to very affordable prices, some great exclusive deals, and ship worldwide, of course. Go to triathlon-corner.store. Mark it as a favorite in your browser, because this could be the new home of online triathlon shopping for you. Or you can just click the link in the show notes and go right to the website if you don't want to type yourself. Alright, now let's hear the interview with Steve Palladino. So today on That Triathlon Show, I am very pleased to welcome Steve Palladino, who is an expert in running with power and analyzing running power data. Welcome, Steve. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for having me on. I'm honored.
Brilliant. And as I've said in the introduction to this episode, this is going to be a slightly more advanced course in running with power, because we've already covered previously on the podcast more of the basics and what running with power is and what it isn't. So you are a perfect guest to help us dig into those more advanced topics. And one thing that I want to start with, because this is very important, it's the foundation of everything we do really with running with power, is training zones for power. There are a few different training zone systems out there, including the Strides training zones themselves, and also Training Peaks has their system, which is based on Jim Vance's. But you have your own system that I also base my system off of, even if it's slightly different. So how did you come up with your training zones, and how do they differ from other training zone systems out there?
Well, I use sort of an amalgamation of a number of different thought processes. I've looked at other training zones, the ones that were developed prior to my own, and then I also was looking at my own athletes that I've coached, how they raced, what kind of power they produce relative to their functional threshold power. So what percentage of functional threshold power they're producing at racing various distances. So in running before power, we based paces off of race pace. There's 10K race pace, there's 5K race pace, there's marathon pace, etc. So I was looking at percent of functional threshold power that races were run at. And then I was looking at other existing power zones from other developers and noted experts. And then lastly, just looking at some of the work from the physiology side of things, from cycling and so forth, that also create a few distinct zone markers or zone limits, so to speak.
And how do your zones differ? Because they do differ, and I think they are better, because I gravitated towards your zones and not Stride's own zone system, nor Jim Vance's or Training Peaks system. I did one slight adaptation that I can get into a bit later, but mostly I use your zones exactly. But so can you explain how are they different from the previously existing zone systems?
Okay, well, there's a few differences. I think most of the zone systems out there pretty much agree on what the easy aerobic running zones are. It's somewhere around 80% of functional threshold power and less. What I did in mine is, looking at some of my athletes, I looked at breaking it up into three different parts, which, I hate to be one that creates more zones, but actually I saw three different activity levels on the easy aerobic side. There's the level where most runners just run their easy aerobic runs, their whatever, a 10 kilometer easy run, and that's usually, most runners, it's around 75 to 80%. Then there's the how my runners performed while they're warming up for, say, intervals, and it was a little bit easier, a little bit slower than that. And then also a third one is how they're running between intervals, when they're really huffing and puffing and needing their recovery. So that was usually really slow, 50 to 65% of functional threshold power. So I broke it into three zones at the easy side.
And what about at the upper end? There are some differences there as well, right?
Exactly. So the upper end is, I inserted. Well, let me start with zone 3. Zone 3 is where the action starts happening in terms of higher level training, and depends on how you define high intensity training. But to me, once you get to 88%, you're at the LT1, or aerobic threshold, at around 88%, and it also coincides with marathon pace, marathon power effort, that most runners are running a marathon between 88 and maybe up to 92%. Of course, the elites go a little bit higher. But that first level there is the sort of the introduction of a higher intensity running, starting at 88%. I broke zone 3 into 2 zones. Then there is the 3A is what I was just describing, that gets close to half marathon, starts at marathon power, and gets close to half marathon power. Then you make the rollover from into 3B, which is about half marathon power, 95%, running up through your functional threshold power, which is, for most people, runs between 10-kilometer racing to 15-kilometer racing. And elites run all the way up to half marathon racing. So that's zone 3. Then I looked at zone 4. That's really as you get to 10K and slightly above. For zone 4, that would be 102 to 105%. And that's where most people approach that in their 10K. But certainly, this is below 5K power. So then zone 5 is the next one. That would be roughly 5K power to sort of the 1,500 to mile power for many people. You're going to ask a question?
So it's kind of your classic VO2 max zone, right?
Exactly. So that's max aerobic. If you're running power in that and it's of sufficient duration in an interval, you're gonna probably tap into VO2 max. So that's the reason I made that distinction, put that zone 4 in there, because I guess you can get to tapping into VO2 max at extended duration in zone 4, but zone 4 is really 10K, slightly faster than 10K pace. So it's a good super threshold training level, but I wouldn't quite put it at your classic VO2 max training level, which would be zone 5 in my power zones. And then, of course, there's zone 6. That's where you're definitely tapping into training your functional reserve capacity or your anaerobic system. You're getting into from mile or 1,500 meters to 800 meter type of power, and as you get faster than mile power, you're getting greater than 50% anaerobic contribution of the energy systems to the power production. So zone 6 is typically tapping into anaerobic work. And then of course there's all out sprinting, your maximal development, which would be zone 7, and that's you're really putting a number on that. I put greater than 150%, but really we're talking about all out for 10 seconds or less for zone 7.
Yeah, and there are. I should have probably noted them down before, because now I can't off the top of my head figure out what the differences are compared to, for example, the stride power zones. They are definitely a bit. I think they're too broad. They don't really distinguish between different types of physiological stimuli well enough. So that's I don't really like them. I think the Jim Vance's are much better, because he has you have a threshold zone, a high intensity zone that is kind of that 10K. But it goes. But the thing with his is that it goes kind of above his VO2 goes from 116, which percent of FTP, whereas yours go up until 116. And just as a runner myself, or triathlete myself, and running with Stride, I know that there's no way I can hold more than 116 for a VO2 max workout. So I think there's a mistake there. If you prescribe a workout with those zones, nobody's going to be able to do that. So that's why I prefer yours. That's one of a few different things that your zone system do better than any of the other systems out there.
Right. I couldn't agree more. I mean, if the Vance power zones for his zone 6 VO2 max, 116, 128, and time is about 2 to 18 minutes. Well, 2 minutes at the higher end at 128%. That would be all out 800 meters for some runners, and like I said, you're tapping into a lot of anaerobic, and certainly you'll tap into VO2 max, but I think you get into VO2 max at a lower power. So yeah, I think I've using the runners that I've coached and looking at their race power and what you can expect from various races, I think I've managed to get the upper level power zones defined relatively well. That said, when you get up there, there's a lot of individual differences.
Absolutely, yeah. Different runners have different amounts of anaerobic capacity. That's where genetics come into play a lot, and just the makeup of the runner. I want to move on from the power zones now, but this is a good discussion, and we will link in the show notes to your article where you have your zones outlined in a neat table, so anybody who wants to can go and have a look at that. And there are also all the other systems, training zone systems, so you can compare with them. But let's move on to the next question, which is actually from a listener. Or we had an email discussion previously, not related to this episode, but just about running with power in general. And this listener was kind of disappointed with the fact that running stress score isn't really measured with as great as it could be, perhaps. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but he said that, for example, if you do really hard anaerobic intervals with long-ish recoveries, the running stress score comes out as significantly lower than it would if you do like just an easy run that's maybe 15 minutes longer, and that's not the way it should be. What's your take on running stress score and how it potentially will develop going forward?
What I'm actually doing at this point in time is looking at 4 different methods of tracking training load, 4 different algorithms. So I do this in WKO4, and the ones that I'm tracking, there's running stress score, which is Stride's metric, and I have their algorithms, so I track that. And then there is the WKO4 default, which is the running training stress score, or RTSS.
And can you just quickly explain for the listeners how those two differ, because they sound kind of similar?
Good. So running stress score is a power-based stress score, and they use a particular exponent for applying relative intensity, I imagine. So it's a power-based training load. RTSS, or running training stress score, that's the default WKO4 training load for runners, is based on,
and also the default training peaks for any listeners that are not familiar with WKO4 but do have training peaks.
I don't use training peaks, but yeah, I'm aware, and I believe in training peaks it will toggle, or you can toggle between a pace based running training stress score, or heart rate base, or power base. It'll take whatever particular entry metric and calculate your training stress score off of that. Yeah, but I don't use that. I do everything in WKO4, so I have to sort of do these things on my own, or developing them on my own, which is the power of WKO4. So I have running stress score, running training stress score, which is the pace base. It uses normalized graded pace, which sort of smooths out the hills and gives you a pace as if it was a flat run. I also am tracking Andy Coggins, Dr. Coggins' classic power-based training load, which is called Training Stress Score. It's been around since about 2005, I believe, and actually was developed before that. And then I have a fourth one that I use, which is one that I've sort of developed that uses running effectiveness, another newer running metric that sort of captures relative efficiency. So I use that along with power data and duration, etc., to calculate a training load. So among these four, if you look at them all together, which I'm doing right now on WKO4, they all produce strikingly similar models of training load: chronic training load, acute training load, and training stress balance. They all produce very, very similar modeling of those. There are subtle differences, and really I like the one that I've developed with running effectiveness. I think it's a little bit more true, but we're splitting hairs. They're all pretty close in terms of the modeling they provide. They're all pretty close.
That's very good to hear, actually, because if they would be different, then that would kind of throw question marks around all of them, basically. So,
exactly.
That's encouraging to hear. Just one quick follow-up, slight side note, but Coggins training stress score, that's kind of similar to the Stride's running stress score, but with a different weighted exponent, I believe. Is that correct?
He doesn't use an exponent. He scales it to relative intensity.
Oh, right. So, yes. Okay. Yeah.
So you're using the power relative to the person's functional threshold. So it scales to relative intensity that way.
Yeah. Of course, it's the basic training stress score that again that you have in Training Peaks for all the users of that platform. So so do you think that does that mean that with the measuring training load that we're already pretty close, or do you think what does the future hold for it? Do you think that it's going to still develop a lot, or what's your take on that?
Well, I think these are pretty close. I've been using them now for about a year in the athletes that I've been coaching, and particularly what's most important to me is to deliver my athlete to race day at a race ready level, and it's been pretty darn good. All of these have been pretty darn good at doing that. The other thing I want to do is avoid getting into overtraining or an injury scenario by ramping them too fast, and I think it works quite well for that. That said, I'm certain that we will get even better in our modeling of training load and injury risk and race readiness, those two important elements, or three important elements, will get even better as we look into this and follow this over time.
Yeah, and that injury risk is something that Stride is working on pretty heavily right now to incorporate in their firmware and in their platform as well. So that will be exciting to follow. Just quickly, in a couple of sentences, so what would you say to the listener who considers it a I guess, incorrect that they get a lower stress score, training load score, whatever you want to call it, for a more intense run, but compared to a basic endurance run that is slightly longer, and even though it feels like the shorter but anaerobic interval type run was much harder.
Well, I would say one, we're not exactly perfect, and I would tend to agree. I have my own feelings about how to model that, but doing so requires some advancement, some complexities. For example, I think that when we run, we go into a very intense block of training. I think that our time constant, the time constant changes. So I think it becomes a longer time constant for the acute training load. So in other words, our fatigue stays around longer in our acute training load. So I think there's ways of modeling that we just are a little bit more complex than the basic system at this point in time.
Right. Okay, so let's move on to the next question, and this is, again, with the theme of this episode being more advanced running power topics. If you could pick one or a few things that you think are the greatest benefits of running with power, besides the obvious, we all know that you can pace hilly courses and things like that better if you have power. It's very, very familiar from cycling, for example, but a few other points besides the very obvious things, the things that you really couldn't live without as a coach for runners, what would they be?
Well, I think the biggest one in my mind is not real time. It's what you do in post processing, in the evaluation after the run. What things you can do, and the biggest one is the power duration curve. We talked earlier about power zones. Well, once you get above functional threshold, then things get more and more gray or fuzzy at the borders of those zones. And really, if you want to do it really properly, you are going to look at an individual's power duration curve and prescribe the higher intensity training from their power duration curve to be more targeted for that individual. So I think the power duration curve is a big game changer in terms of individualizing training.
Yeah, we had Tim Cusick from WKO4 on in a previous episode, and we talked about that exactly, and that's something that works brilliantly, really smoothly for bike training in WKO4, and I guess for you, because you coach runners, so they don't have like a bike profile, that's one thing that I think is that WKO4 needs to sort out, to have separate power duration curves, because right now, if you're a triathlete and you do both cycling and running, then you get your cycling power duration curve, and yeah, that's some of the things that I imagine that you are doing I can't do with triathletes, and I hope that WKO4 can pretty soon get the running with power on par with what they have for cycling. But that is a good one. Is there anything else that you want to mention besides the power duration curve?
No, I think that's the biggest one. I mean, I can go in, we can go down the rabbit hole of the various other metrics. I think one
in that case, let me lead us down the rabbit hole,
okay,
because I have
good.
a couple of particular ones that I want to ask you about. Because running effectiveness, you mentioned that, and we have talked about that in the previous Running with Power episode with Chris Haig on episode 59. For you, the question for you is, what are the things that you are typically looking for and or finding when you do your post-workout or race analysis, and in terms of running effectiveness specifically?
Well, that's great, because I was going to start going into that one on the last question, because I think this is a very powerful metric, I think. First of all, just to clarify, running effectiveness is the ratio of speed to power. So speed in meters per second divided by power in watts per kilogram gives you this metric of running effectiveness. Running effectiveness is if you look at it another way, it's how effectively is a runner at converting power to speed. So this, to me, is a very important metric. In cycling, the efficiency is somewhat constrained by the bicycle. Everybody has relatively the same efficiency. Where in runners, it comes out that how effective they are at producing speed from their power varies from runner to runner. So to me, looking at this metric is important. One use is just stratifying potential. If I get a young runner and their running effectiveness at threshold is like 1.04, which is a pretty good number at threshold, my eyes open up and I say this kid might have some potential. By the same token, if we look at somebody who's 0.97 at threshold, it would tell me, hey, we need to work on this. And running effectiveness is pretty hard to move that number. It takes a lot of work, but there are interventions that do allow you to improve on it. So I look at running effectiveness in terms of stratifying potential, in terms of directing training interventions, and also performances as well.
What are those training interventions that you can use to improve your running effectiveness?
Okay, so running effectiveness, it's hard to say because this is stuff that we're just learning, but running economy probably impacts running effectiveness. And the umbrella of running effectiveness probably has under it a person's running economy. So things that change running economy may improve running effectiveness. And also some of the things we look at in our metrics, like horizontal power ratio, which I can discuss in a moment. Horizontal power ratio tells me a little bit about what we can actually do. So anything that improves the runner's horizontal power ratio, which is that percentage of power that is directed horizontally, external power, the power that's produced by stride or recorded by stride or reported by stride. External power has components of moving the center of mass up and down. That's oscillatory power or form power if you use strides vernacular. And then there's horizontal power, moving the body, the center of mass forward horizontally. The greater the horizontal power, the more it correlates with running effectiveness. So if I produce a chart that looks at running effectiveness versus horizontal power, it correlates horizontal power. So how do we improve horizontal power? Well, I work on various form drills and even work like stretching the anterior hip flexors and increasing gluteal strength and increasing SI mobility, sacroiliac mobility. All of these little things contribute to improving horizontal power, which then in turn improve running effectiveness. Of course, there's many more.
I think you have an article on that. Is that right? On the form drills and other things listed, so we can send the listeners to them. Or am I mistaken?
No, it's there. Although I'm working on a more detailed list with video demonstration at this point in time.
Yeah, we'll post a link to your entire article library. What's the name of this specific article? Do you remember roughly, so that the listeners can find it? Because I know I read it, but I don't remember what the name of it was.
I think there is it contains a little bit about that in the article that I've written on running effectiveness. It's called Understanding Running Effectiveness, and it does go into some thoughts on improving running effectiveness in that article.
Yeah, here it is. Yeah. Okay, so sorry for that, but go on where you left off, unless I made you forget where you were already.
Well, I was going to say that running effectiveness, there's probably interventions that may be possible that that I personally haven't really tapped into yet. We're still in a path of discovery, but my feelings, my hypothesis is that if we do various things to improve running economy, it will translate into improvements in running effectiveness. Also, if we do things to improve horizontal power, it's going to translate into improved running effectiveness. Leg spring stiffness may also have some benefit improving run effectiveness as well. So there's a lot of these.
In one sentence or two, what is leg spring stiffness and why is it important potentially?
Okay, leg spring stiffness is the elastic recoil that we have provided in our soft tissues, muscles and tendons and fascia. So I always use the analogy of a racehorse. They have a lot of elasticity in their tendons. So when they load their limb, they're actually getting elastic recoil as part of their propulsion mechanism. Human beings have that as well, although it's a lot less than what you'd see in a racehorse. We have that as well. So consider it this. This is free power. That's in quotations. This is free energy being delivered back into propelling the runner forward, meaning it has no oxygen costs. When you land, the tendons and fascia are loaded, and that elastic component is loaded, and as you propel, there's that recoil without any oxygen requirement whatsoever. You're getting some propulsion. So leg spring stiffness, if it's good, it's adding to your forward propulsion free of oxygen, which theoretically should improve running economy and running effectiveness.
And leg spring stiffness, that's provided within Stride, and also, as you mentioned, form power, which we can use to calculate horizontal power. Running effectiveness is not. You need to calculate that yourself or use WKO4 just to give a short breakdown of those metrics. So leg spring stiffness, continuing on that theme. So what is that trainable? And do you think there is a benchmark for what it should be, and what do you do as a training intervention to improve that?
Okay, so I do think it's trainable. The benchmark that I look at is I first of all, it makes no sense to use raw leg spring stiffness, because if you have more mass, you're going to have greater leg spring stiffness as a raw number. So I always want to look at normalized to weight. Then you can compare light runners and heavier runners. So divide your raw leg spring stiffness number by kilograms in weight, and that gives you the normalized to weight version. Now, what I look for as a benchmark is 0.150 and that's leg spring stiffness divided by kilograms as a benchmark. If someone's above that, they're pretty good. If they're below that, we want to address this a little bit more. And certainly if they're down below 0.140. I'm really wanting to work on that. So the work we do for that is things that are improving your springiness. Just to throw that out. So form drills that are working on ground reaction time, ground contact time. So there's skip drills and various other form drills. And then also the big one is plyometrics. Plyometrics is something that I'll incorporate into a program, particularly for the runner in need that's sitting down there around 0.140 and lower. But frankly, even if someone's at 1.50, doesn't mean that they shouldn't do some work along the lines of form drills and plyometrics, in my mind.
Yeah, I would throw strength training in general in there as well, maybe some explosive. I've noticed that because I've been following this actually, and since starting my strength training again after the off season in the base season here, I've noticed my leg spring stiffness improve quite significantly, and I'm now I think when I checked, it's usually around above that 0.150. So strength training in general as well, but plyometrics I would agree is the big one.
I would agree with you, and actually the literature would support your statement on weight training. So I definitely could add that one in as well.
Yeah. What about, so we mentioned there the benchmark and piggyback into running effectiveness. What's your benchmark there? You through the 0.97 and this needs improvement, and 1.05. Okay, this is good, but is there a limit, a point when it's okay, and a point when it needs to be a primary focus for an athlete, maybe?
Well, I think that if someone is between 0.99 and 1.02, they're sitting pretty good. If they're over 1.02, that's actually quite good. I think elites are probably at over 1.04 or 1.05. Now, when I'm giving you these benchmarks, they're at threshold power on flat surface, because running effectiveness is sensitive to intensity, and it's also sensitive to hills. So in order to compare apples to apples, you want to look at what the runner's running effectiveness is at around threshold power on relatively flat surface. Now, back to the numbers. If someone's under 0.99, then I like to work on it and really get eager to work on it when it's below 0.98 at threshold power.
Yeah, brilliant. And this is something that anybody can calculate using data in the Stride Power Center. You don't need WKO4, although that's pretty handy. But just as you said, it's the speed per power to weight ratio. So speed in meters per second. So it's you do a little spreadsheet for yourself, and it will become easy to follow it even without WKO4. Related to that, this is probably the final question before the rapid fire questions. How, if you don't have, for many of the listeners here that don't have and probably aren't going to get WKO4, how much can you get out of using just the Stride Power Center and maybe something like Training Peaks and spreadsheets in terms of doing this analysis that you talk about and that you can get so much out of? How much can you still do if you don't have WKO4?
You can probably get by pretty well. You mentioned Chris Haig as one of your interview subjects before, and I actually listened to that podcast. He has a great spreadsheet that he puts his material into.
Yeah, we'll link to that here again. It was linked in that episode, in episode 59.
Perfect, because I would encourage the listeners to use that if they're going the route of a do-it-yourself sort of thing. Power Center, it does have a power duration curve. I'm still discovering all the nuances of it, but it does have a power duration curve, which allows the runner to identify areas of need and also perhaps even prescribe some of their training off of that. Power Center is not customizable, so you'd have to, you get your raw leg spring stiffness and do the enter it into a spreadsheet to get your leg spring stiffness per kilogram, and the same thing with getting horizontal power ratio and form power ratio from the raw data in Power Center. Training Peaks, if you have something like that, or Golden Cheetah, then it opens up a little bit more analysis and greater power in terms of analyzing your data.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, but that's good, and I agree with the Power Center and that spreadsheet that we'll link to, and you can make your own additions as you get more used to it and become curious and start exploring things. Then that will be really powerful, and you can get a lot out of that without having WKO4. So the rapid fire questions that I have for you, take just one sentence or two to answer these, starting with, what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to running or endurance sports?
I can't give you just one. There's so many. I like to
throw them at me.
Pick and choose. Okay, so books. Hunter Allen and Andy Coggan's book on training and racing with a power meter from the cycling perspective. I'd recommend runners reading that. There's a lot of good stuff there. I like Lore of Running. I like Coe's book on running. Steve,
sorry, Coe's book on running. Which one is that? Sebastian Coe.
No, Peter Coe. Sebastian Coe's dad. I think he did it with. I think he did it with David Martin as well. So that's a great book. Steve Magnus' book is a really good one. Science of Running, Secret of Running, which goes over a lot of power, and that's by Van Meegen and Van Dyke. A lot of good stuff. And then, of course, I've got some manuals from Arthur Litter that I got from Charles Howe that go into a lot of his methods. So I try to read a lot and utilize a lot of sources to learn from.
Yeah. And I'll throw one more resource here that we'll link to again, and that's your article library, because that's really good.
Oh, thank you.
Next question is, what do you wish you had known or wish you had done differently at some point in your career? We should mention that you've had a very strong elite running career as well in your background.
Yeah. So, one thing for sure, I wish I had power back in the day. That would make things a lot better in terms of tracking training load and so forth. I wish I had a 2:16 PR, and I was training for the Olympic trials.
In the marathon?
Yep, Olympic trials marathon. And I ran a 30-miler really intensely about 2 weeks before the Olympic trials marathon, and I got injured. Yeah, I wish I could go back and not run that run and come in a little bit healthier and be able to run the trials, because I was in about 2:13 shape at that point.
Yeah, wow. So finally, who's somebody in running or endurance sports that you look up to?
Again, there's a lot of people. I don't want to single out one person, but all of my coaches, some of the great researchers that are out there as well. I put Andy Coggan in there, and then I look up to all of my athletes. So they just impress the heck out of me, how they put in their work and are really intense and motivated. That is something I really look up to as well.
All right, brilliant. So this has been really useful, Steve, and I highly encourage all the listeners to go and check out your articles that we'll link to in the show notes, and also go and join the Palladino Power Project Facebook group, which is a great discussion forum for all things running with power, and that will also, of course, be linked to in the show notes. Is there anything else that you want to mention before we end this interview?
No, thank you very much, and we'll keep working and try to come up with even better things in the future.
Absolutely. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Steve Palladino. It was a real pleasure having you on the show, Steve.
Thank you.
So that one really was a doozy in my opinion. As you know, I'm really a big fan of running with power and coaching runners or triathletes that use power meters. So I really enjoyed that talk with Steve. I think there are tons of value bombs there, and this may be one of the ones that you go and listen to again, and then you go and check the show notes, and then you start playing around with some of the different things that we talked about. But some of the things that really stood out to me were first, especially if you're kind of new to running with power, so you haven't really done a lot of these more advanced things, and you probably don't have WKO4, and it's maybe a bit difficult to use because let's face it almost requires a degree in itself to use WKO4. Sometimes it feels like that, but the thing that stood out is that you can get by very well and get most of the important analysis done using just the Stride Power Center and Training Peaks or Golden Cheetah and a nice spreadsheet, which we'll link to in the show notes on thattriathlonshow.com. So don't let this episode and all the talk about WKO4 overwhelm you. That said, if you want a primer on WKO4, go and listen to episode 62 with Tim Cusick, where he talks about why WKO4 is so great for triathletes. The second thing that stood out to me was Steve's comment about the power of running with power, pun intended, not being in the real-time application of it, but actually in the analysis, post-race and post-workout. So if you want to get the most out of running with power, you really need to look into some of these things post-race, post-workout, like running with effectiveness and other things that we mentioned, and monitor them, rather than just use power as a substitute for sticking to a certain pace or heart rate. Because yeah, that's good, that's excellent, because you will stick to a certain output. As I said, hills is a great example of that. But it's only the beginning, and the analysis part is so powerful, and what you can get out of running with power if you do that. And that's probably it. There are a lot of great details in there, but I don't think any one of them is necessarily more important than the other. Or actually, yeah, let me change my mind here a little bit. I kind of do, and I think that Steve would agree. If you get started with analyzing your running power data, I would start with running effectiveness, and Steve would agree, I'm sure. So start with that to just get started with the analysis part, and then as you get familiar with that and learn to see how it changes with pace, with course, etc. And then you can get started with some of the other advanced topics that we also covered. But start with running effectiveness. That would be my top tip for you. That's the thing that I use the most when I analyze running with power. It's definitely the first thing and most important thing that I look at. All right, so as always, you can find the show notes for today's episode on thattriathlonshow.com. And but if you want to have a triathlon or running training plan personalized for you that's based on power, feel free to send me an email and ask about that. My email is michael@scientifictriathlon.com, and that's Michael with a K. Many of my athletes are already using running with power, the athletes that I coach. So I've been in the trenches for quite some time myself already. And I'm very happy to make you a training plan if that's something that you want to. On Thursday's episode, you'll hear an interview with world-class researcher Veronica Vlek, and I'll actually interview her live in Cascais, which is a city very close to Lisbon, so that will be really cool. And the topic will be triathlon injuries, illnesses, chronic fatigue, and general health. And Veronica she's an expert on these topics within the realm of triathlon. She's been working with top athletes and age groupers alike, and knows this stuff inside and out. So I think this will be super, super useful and interesting. I'm looking forward to going there in a couple of days by the time of this recording and chatting with Veronica. Thank you to Triathlon Corner for sponsoring this episode. Triathlon Corner is the new online home of triathlon shopping with the best products to great prices. Check them out at triathlon-corner.store. And thank you to Precision Hydration. Remember to take their free online sweat test on precisionhydration.com to get a personalized hydration strategy for your next race. And use the discount code THATTRIATHLONSHOW, all one word, for 15% off. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.